Imagine a small nation making a bold decision, one that it believed could inspire change across the globe. Lithuania made headlines when it became the first European country to officially recognize Taiwan, defying China's strict stance on the island. The move earned praise from democratic nations, but behind the applause lay an unexpected price, one that has left Lithuania's economy in turmoil and its government grappling with a tough choice: rebuild relations with China or face the risk of economic isolation. How did Lithuania get to this point, and is there a way forward? What sparked the diplomatic fallout with China, and what did Lithuania hope to achieve? When Lithuania decided to support Taiwan, it was seen as a stand for democracy and sovereignty. But China didn't take kindly to this. In response, Beijing quickly imposed harsh sanctions, cutting off Lithuanian imports and terminating crucial trade agreements. According to the New York Times, Lithuanian exports to China plummeted by more than 90% in just a few months, throwing the nation's economy into crisis. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi warned that any nation underestimating China's position on Taiwan would face severe repercussions. For Lithuania, those repercussions came swiftly, with the loss of a major trading partner, sending shockwaves through the economy as businesses struggled and workers faced uncertainty. The question loomed: was this diplomatic gamble worth the cost? Lithuania's leaders framed their recognition of Taiwan as a bold step in defense of democratic values. They hoped that by setting an example, other nations would follow suit, challenging China's growing authoritarian influence. Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis called it an opportunity to stand up for the principles that democracies should champion. But the reality turned out to be far more complicated. The anticipated wave of international support didn't materialize as quickly as Lithuania had hoped, and the economic backlash from China was more severe than anticipated. As analyst Sarah Wilson from the Financial Times noted, Lithuania had underestimated the economic leverage China holds and overestimated Europe's willingness to confront Beijing. The fallout affected multiple sectors, from high-tech industries to agriculture, with businesses struggling to survive under the pressure of lost markets and trade disruptions. But did Lithuania expect the West to come to its rescue? Did it anticipate that the EU would step in with economic or political backing? Initially, Lithuania believed that European nations would support its position on Taiwan. According to Politico Europe, Lithuania expected moral support to translate into tangible backing. But the reality was different. While there was diplomatic solidarity, European giants like Germany and France, who have deep economic ties with China, were hesitant to take a more aggressive stance. As EU analyst Robert Bierman pointed out, while Lithuania's allies voiced support, very few were willing to jeopardize their own economic interests by confronting China head-on. This diplomatic divide left Lithuania in a vulnerable position, facing the wrath of a global superpower with limited support from its European counterparts. The economic consequences were far-reaching. Prior to the fallout, Lithuania's exports to China were valued at over 300 million euros annually, a vital revenue for a small economy. That revenue all but disappeared, creating a financial earthquake. Industries that relied on trade with China, such as laser technology, agriculture, and manufacturing, were hit hard. Many companies now face layoffs or are struggling to stay afloat, and the ripple effect is being felt throughout the workforce. The laser technology sector, a cornerstone of Lithuania's high-tech exports, was particularly hard hit. Once a leading supplier of laser equipment to China, the sector saw its market virtually vanish, leading to significant job losses and lost revenue. In agriculture, Lithuania's meat and grain exports to China came to a standstill, directly impacting local farmers and suppliers who depended on those markets. For citizens in Lithuania, the impact is personal. Small business owners who had spent years cultivating relationships in China now find themselves facing an uncertain future. One factory owner told Reuters, "We've been left out in the cold. Without the Chinese market, we're struggling just to stay open." So how does the public in Lithuania view this decision? A recent poll conducted by the Baltic Times revealed that around 55% of Lithuanians believe their government should prioritize economic stability overtaking a more confrontational stance with China. This divided opinion reflects the growing concern about the consequences of the government's bold move. While Lithuania remains steadfast in its support for Taiwan, the reality is that the country is now facing the consequences of its decision. The question remains, will Lithuania's gamble pay off in the long run, or will the cost prove too high to bear? And what does the future hold for a small country caught between the ideals of democracy and the pressure of global economic realities? Lithuania's story is a cautionary tale of the risks involved in challenging a global superpower, and it leaves the world wondering whether other nations will be brave enough to follow Lithuania's lead, or if the economic consequences will be too great for them to bear. Currently, 45% of the public supports the government's stance on prioritizing sovereignty and democratic values over economic convenience. One protester in Vilnius shared a sentiment that resonates with many, telling Euronews, "We cannot overlook human rights, but we also can't ignore the importance of our economy. There must be a compromise." For many Lithuanians, the debate is no longer just about abstract principles. It's about securing jobs, economic stability, and the future of their nation. With mounting domestic pressures, the question arises, why? Is Lithuania now reaching out to China? What has changed in its approach in the face of significant economic struggles? Lithuania's leadership has begun quietly signaling a shift in tone, suggesting a willingness to ease tensions. Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis recently implied a more pragmatic approach, saying, "While our values remain paramount, we must also ensure the long-term prosperity of our nation." This shift marks a growing recognition that balancing political ideals with economic reality is becoming increasingly urgent for Lithuania. Finding a way to advance that preserves democratic principles is the path forward. While addressing economic needs is the current challenge, does this mean Lithuania is abandoning its core values, or is it simply adjusting to economic necessities? The question of balancing ideology with pragmatism is not unique to Lithuania, though the stakes here feel particularly high. Economist Dr. John Lan from Cambridge University shared with Bloomberg that smaller nations often face this tough decision, whether to stick to their principles or make compromises to survive. Lithuania's leaders are now finding that these priorities are not as distinct as they once seemed. Talks about potential trade negotiations with China have emerged, suggesting that Lithuania could cautiously re-engage with China without compromising its position on Taiwan. The idea of a more pragmatic approach has sparked debate across Lithuania. Some view it as a sensible middle ground, an opportunity to revive the economy without fully abandoning democratic values. Others, however, see it as a retreat from the principles that the country fought to uphold. As Lithuania reassesses its position, Europe's larger economies appear to be heading in the opposite direction, strengthening their ties with China instead of following Lithuania's example. Countries like Germany, France, and Italy continue to deepen their economic relationships with China, driven by trade interests. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz recently stated that economic relations with China are essential to Europe's recovery. This sentiment reflects a broader European trend where economic advantages often take precedence over ideological concerns. Lithuania, in contrast, finds itself increasingly isolated as larger economies prioritize trade, while smaller nations like Lithuania bear the brunt of ideological stances. Alina Pekova, an analyst from the European Policy Institute, remarked that Europe's approach to China is deeply fragmented. Larger nations pursue economic gains, while smaller nations like Lithuania are left to face the consequences on their own. As Lithuania grapples with its isolation, is this the perfect moment for a diplomatic reset? The timing may be critical. China, facing its own economic slowdown due to trade tensions with the US and the lingering effects of the pandemic, is rethinking its international strategy. Beijing is reportedly exploring ways to rebuild relationships with countries it previously sanctioned, seeking to stabilize its trade networks amid global economic uncertainty. For Lithuania, this could present a unique opportunity. Having endured considerable economic setbacks, The Lithuanian government is now signaling openness to talks, aware that improved relations with China could relieve some of the pressure it faces domestically. Officials in Lithuania have acknowledged that a thaw in relations might help stabilize key industries and strengthen the nation's economy. Could this be the beginning of a more pragmatic approach to foreign policy for Lithuania? Only time will tell. While Lithuania continues to show support for Taiwan, it faces a critical challenge: ensuring the well-being of its own citizens. A government spokesperson recently emphasized to Reuters that the country's focus is on resilience, balancing principle with pragmatism.